Tonight, I'll just start off by saying welcome again, and I'll give a big welcome to my colleague Sam Khalil, who's joined us tonight. He's the Managing Director of DPN. In all of the marketing collateral we put out, we talk about Sam's experience of 20 plus years, which makes him sound much older than he is, but he certainly isn't. But he certainly has a lot of background in birthing DPN, starting in financial planning, turning that into a very successful property investment business. So Sam, welcome tonight.
Thanks, David. Great to be here with you and everyone else. So thanks for joining us.
That's great, Sam. Thank you very much. My name's David Bruce. I work in Sam's team as the marketing leader, and we're very excited to put this webinar on tonight for everybody. Before we start through with some of the great content we've put together tonight, we will put in some slight T's and C's, if you like, and that's really that this isn't financial education. This is financial education rather, not advice. And it certainly doesn't take into account your personal circumstances. So it's really important that everybody does get that independent advice and make sure you've got an expert team. And certainly that's what DPN sees ourselves as, that expert team. But it's important everybody sort of make sure they have everything works to their personal circumstances. Secondly to that, just to support a lot of the research we're going to talk about today, we do get our information from independent sources, and some of the ones we see there right through from Government Bureau Statistics, right through from CoreLogic and Residex. So we source our information from independent sources, and we're really excited to present this to you tonight. At DPN, we love a quote, and we've got a couple of good ones tonight. The first one is really relevant to 2020, I suspect, that has been a challenging year for all of us. It's certainly one that we didn't expect, but I guess from we're looking at property investment and building wealth. Mantra for us is very much about all of your dreams can come true if you've got the courage to pursue them. And I think second to that quote is an even more pertinent one, and that's one from the great Warren Buffett, and you may have seen this one before, and that's about being fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And that's certainly a good mantra for tonight around where the market is, where the market's going, and where the opportunities certainly lie at the moment. Before we jump back in, I want to hand over to Sam, who's going to kick off with some great insights. I wanted to start with a couple of get to know you polls. These are certainly anonymous, by the way, but it's a really good way for us to get a sense of where everyone might be at the moment in terms of their property investment journey. We'll pull up the first one. So the first poll we have is, do you currently have an investment property? And we're interested to see how many people actually have an investment property. There's 1.7 million people in Australia have a investment property. So we're interested to see the mix of this audience. And so those responses coming through at the moment there. You can see that probably around close to, we're seeing, yeah, it's looking around sort of 3 in 5. So that's a large proportion already have a property, and the other 2 in 5 are certainly starting that journey. So that's an excellent one to start with. Share those results for you there. You can see split for 60-30 there pretty evenly. We have another one now. We will kick off poll 2. And this one is a great one. This is a real barbecue conversation we find is, do you think apartments or houses are a better choice? It's interesting here. So swaying to one direction, certainly. Pretty strong views on this one, I think. Yeah, so it's overwhelmingly, we're seeing that people are preferring houses. They're 89%. It's an interesting take on that around the apartment. And Sam's specifically going to talk around the apartment market and what that's doing in the market tonight as well. So really interesting there. And the last poll we have is a really interesting one here that we like to ask. And that is, after Sydney and Melbourne, what is the most expensive city in Australia? It's not a trick question. Is it Brisbane, Newcastle, Perth, or Wollongong? I'm always interested to see the results of this question, framing where people think in Australia and the many markets of Australia. So interesting results here. Very mixed, very mixed. We can see that there were some people saying Brisbane, which would be a natural choice. Newcastle was quite popular, Perth, and then Wollongong. Well, funnily enough, Wollongong is the third most expensive city in Australia. And that's certainly one of the areas we're going to talk about tonight as well, on why it's become one of those most expensive areas in Sydney. So it's an interesting poll, and thank you for partaking in that. As I said, it's completely anonymous. But we're really pleased that we're able to do that. So now we really want to kick off. I want to hand over to Sam now and effectively start looking about what is happening today. I mean, some of the news we've heard, Sam, has been that the market's going to crash by 30%. I mean, what do you take of that sort of comment that you hear in the market these days?
Thanks, David. Yeah. I mean, I've been hearing that in the 25 years I've actually been in this industry. I've never seen it happen. In fact, in the history of Australian property, there has never been a drop of 30%. What I mean by that is on average for the whole median house price in Australia. So there's been corrections, but there's never been a crash, unlike share market crashes. And I think the word of the moment here, and even when I saw it in our slide deck, I shuddered, is that word unprecedented. So tell me if you haven't heard that word a gazillion times over the last few months. And yes, look, it certainly is unprecedented in our time for a pandemic. However, it's not unprecedented in human history. And, even in the last 100 years, the world has seen other calamities, including the Spanish flu, wars, plagues, and what have you. But what I would say is that what's also unprecedented is our ability to respond. So if you do go back, around the time of the First World War, maybe potentially before the Second World War, and you had the Great Depression, people started talking about the crash in the global economy and what have you. But what we've been able to do through modern economics and the lens of history is to respond in an unprecedented way, where you see governments, and even the American government or the Federal Reserve, we'll do whatever it takes. We'll print as much money as possible and inject so much stimulus, because they've learned from history that the cost of not doing anything is greater, because you've got to pay for people in unemployment, the economy shrinking, so you collect less taxes and what have you. So the reality is, I don't think anyone in Australia could arguably say that they can compare their life now in this unprecedented time to the Great Depression. We're not rationing food. We've got probably more food than ever, and we've got issues with obesity. People are hurting, that's no doubt. But we wouldn't say it's similar to some of the other pandemics and great tragedies of the earlier 20th century. So if you look at even the Australian government and its ability to respond with JobKeeper, JobSeeker, Home Builder, other stimulus measures, what you're finding is that we're really helping as many people as possible. There's a percentage, and a small percentage of the population, that's hurting a little bit more, but even those people have a good social security net and ability to be taken care of. So we've seen our banks, Team Australia, get together and help people with their homes and their home loans and defer payments and what have you. So we're going to see some interesting stats shortly, but what's important is that there isn't just a carte blanche collapse. There are some areas that are really feeling pain. There's some areas that are actually increasing. And the fact that the Reserve Bank, as they're looking to help out with sustained low interest rates, is actually creating one of the greatest opportunities of our lifetime. And if people can look through the fear and what have you, they can do really well. I remember going back just over a decade with the GFC, and just to let you know, our business at the moment is having record inquiry. Because if you think about it, most of the people who are in employment, and that's more like 9.5 out of 10 or 9.25 out of 10, their position just got better. Their home loan rates got so much cheaper, and their holding costs going forward, if they're into investment, is again 30% cheaper. So what has actually dropped has been a 30% drop in interest rates, but not a 30% drop in housing rates. So we'll look at some actual specific numbers in a minute, but we're not seeing that collapse. And I guess one of the biggest reasons that is we're not entering into a period where there's been massive oversupply of property that has caused a crash. And that was one of the biggest causes of the GFC in the US. They had just produced so much property and there was oversupply. We hadn't come into this. This is more a health pandemic that's affected the economy. It's not an overzealous economy or over-speculative economy with massive amounts of surplus stock. Now, there are issues where there is surplus stock, but we'll address those in a moment.
That's wonderful, Sam. It's really interesting on that, you're right. It's not the first challenging period we've been through. And you're right. We're seeing a very high level of inquiry across our business at the moment. Some interesting information and numbers here, Sam, that we wanted to share tonight around what's actually happening with, the dwelling value prices, particularly in the capital cities.
Yeah, thanks, David. So this is really good. And this is where I'd like you to widen your lens. So again, people talking about this massive collapse. Look, there is a correction happening. And again, this is the average of values. So some areas are actually increasing, some are decreasing, some are fairly flat. But if you look at the quarter, during, again, probably the heightened time of this crisis right now, over the last 3 or 4 months, the drop we're looking at is 2.1%. However, over 12 months, we've actually had a growth. So if you widen your lens a little bit more, this isn't the correction so far is fairly mild compared to the peak we hit in 2017. Australia, when I say the peak, again, I'm talking probably the major markets of Sydney and Melbourne. We had massive run up in values up to 2017. Then there was a correction and we went to probably dropped on average about 10%. And then we started growing back up again. So that was one of the fastest recoveries in modern history of the property markets. So I think what you'll see here is in a soft correction in certain areas, and we're seeing that already. But maybe over 12 months, we may drop back to zero over 12 months, and it's a rolling return, but we may not actually drop that much. And that's just going to depend, what happens over the next few months. And there's a lot of people waiting and sitting on the sidelines thinking that we're going to fall off a fiscal cliff in September and then maybe in March next year. But I don't think the government has come this far to see everything collapse and fall over. It'd be wasted money to see the economy just drop off, and they will look to continue to stimulate where need be to get people through to the other side. So, your biggest moves you can see are around about 3% in Melbourne, Sydney 2% in that, but generally some areas you can see have slightly tilted up a little bit. But overall, we're not seeing anywhere in double-digit drops at all.
That's great, Sam. So we'll move on to some more numbers here, Sam, and this is specific to the New South Wales residential market itself. And we've got a first series of numbers, and I've got another set of numbers to share with you there. So, your take on this, there's some big numbers on this screen here.
Exactly. And again, this again can show some, specific areas that are actually doing well. And this is, again, a result of the government stimulus. So if you look at total value of new home loans, and this is, over 12 months from, last year, there's a 16% increase. So that shows new homes. I'm not talking apartments here, particularly new homes. You can see the numbers are actually up $6.7 billion in loans, and the actual value of new houses sold is up 21%. So this doesn't show actually a drop off in demand, but actually a significant increase. If you then look at the dwellings listed for auction, look, that's again off a low rate, 270% increase through April. But what it's showing is that what really dropped off isn't house prices, but house availability. People pulled their houses from the market. So we didn't see an oversupply of stock. We actually saw an undersupply of stock. So that actually kept house prices fairly firm. We're still seeing mixed results. We're seeing record prices in some areas being achieved. So that hardly speaks to a massive correction. And I often ask people, that own their own home, when people say house price might drop 30%, I ask them, would you sell your house for 30% less? They said no. I said, would you sell it for 20% less? They still said no. Would you sell it for, they said no. So it's only again that if there is a massive discount, that is a distressed sale. It is a specific point of time. It is not every property in Australia all being sold at the same time at 30% discount to market. So there might be some point at some house that just is sold because they're in a really bad position, but that hardly can define the whole market unless you see repeated and systemic collapsing of the market and everybody is selling at 30% drops in price, but that is just not happening. What we're seeing now is just if you look at the value of home loans to investors in New South Wales, so there's been a lot of talk that investors have really retreated from the market, but over 12 months, a 1% drop, that's hardly a retreat. What we can see here again is the auction clearance rate is a bit lower since February, but that again is off a peak of around about 80%. So we're going to begin to see that increase, but private treaty, because of some of the restrictions, isn't going too bad as well. Now, what's certainly interesting here is the apartment approvals, the construction and development sector. This is where there is a pain in the economy and lack of jobs in some of these areas, but it's taken up slack in the new residential home or detached housing market. But 66% drop in approvals. So what that will speak to is that the current oversupply that we're seeing in apartments, and we're going to see that shortly in rents in the next slide. And we also know that immigration has certainly halted. So at the moment, there is a certain oversupply in apartments that's affecting the rentals and the values of those apartments. People are bought off the plan apartments, seeing significant drops in values, banks struggling to settle some. There's a high level of risk in those areas and rents dropping. But we believe that at some point that will hit equilibrium because the pipeline is tightening up. And what's interesting is as the pipeline tightens up and the lack of new stock comes to market and the available stock eventually gets absorbed, we could potentially see a vaccine in the next 6 to 12 months. We could see immigration, selective immigration or immigration strategies to allow people to come to Australia where they're tested and quarantined so we don't lose all of immigration. What you might find is we could potentially end up in undersupply again, even in the apartment sector. I think that's a little while off, but because things slow down, it's very hard to start them up very, very quickly again. And you could have a flood of immigration very quickly if there is a vaccine or there are some great strategies in bringing people through with a quarantine method, like through hotels and checking their health and that. So yeah, David, let's head on to the next slide.
So this data here, Sam, this is, exactly as you said, this is an interesting one because this directly now talks about what's happening in terms of the rental market. And, that's obviously a really important piece for investors. And one of the most common questions we get is, will I have my property leased? So this is a really important slide. Yeah,
Dad. So my whole career for 25 years, when I've shown our doctrine around where we look for properties, predominantly it isn't in CBD or near CBD areas. And this has been the one biggest thing that people have differed and feared and said to me, I want it near the city so I can get a tenant. And I've told them that they can always get tenants in suburban areas, but the prevailing belief has always been it needs to be near the city. Well, unfortunately, and this is not to gloat about it, but the reality is we're seeing this is actually the most vulnerable area. Reason being is that if you look here in Melbourne and Sydney, there's considerably about 50% increase in listings from March 2020 to August 2020. Median rents are dropping as a result, and some of these areas are seeing 1 in 7 or 1 in 6 apartments vacant. Why is that? Well, again, a lot of new immigrants, when they usually come to Australia, would rent in these major cities to start with. Secondly, a lot of workers that may have worked around city, hospitality and what have you would rent in those areas. They can't. So they're out of the market. Airbnbs that were for holiday lettings that come back onto permanent lettings, a number of things. And so probably one of the other prevailing things is the majority of these apartment towers that you see in high density areas, 70 to 90% of them are often investors. So they have a very low owner occupier. So this is where we see a bit of risk, where we've generally focused on areas where the owner occupier mix is more like the 70, 90%, and you've only got 10 to 30% renters or investors. And that then again creates a little bit more resilience. And this has been certainly highlighted in this time. And I think permanently that this myth of just being able to get a tenant because you're in the city or near the city isn't so true. We manage about 730 properties in suburban areas, and our vacancy rate is less than 1/3%. So we're talking about 3 or 4 properties and they're leased within a few weeks versus, 1 in 6 or 1 in 7. What we've also not seen is massive drops in rent at all in our portfolio, or big requests for people to adjust their rent. We've had probably only half a dozen people ask, and they've been small numbers, somewhere between the $20 to $40 mark. in adjustment. So it's been quite resilient. And I think a testament to our model and our approach, but not saying we're the only ones that get it right. But what we've seen of some other people that you might have thought have been a bit more resilient, they're actually a little bit more vulnerable.
Sam, that's all great data. And now I guess, a key thing is that's the moment in time of what we've been through in 2020 and what's happening. And I guess really we want to put that lens forward, because that's what, good investment about. It's about looking forward and where we're going. I mean, I read a really interesting stat today that the home builder grant, first week of take up, 1,100 applicants straight away. So it shows that there's demand out there for that kind of stimulus.
Yeah, it's very true. So, I mean, when we look at, certainly the world has forever changed, but some things will never change. Humans aren't built for isolation. I think there's a number of us who probably say, I've had it just working from home. Like if you do something wrong in prison, they throw you in isolation. So it's a form of punishment, and there's a reason for that. And it often sends people crazy. But the reality is where people work, that's going to change, but it's not going to see the disappearing of offices, because you need that for culture and what have you. However, what has permanently changed is the idea of everyone has to be in the office for 5 days a week. And, we're seeing many organizations giving that flexibility to allow people to work from home. Even in our company, we're actually turning this into a virtue and looking to employ talent all around the country and no longer limited to a geographic place. So we see this as an opportunity, and building our whole infrastructure and our business around cloud-based software and technology, and even our property management business is a testament to that. We already had all our staff remote working. So that's flowing into where, a number of people, and we're seeing this in certain lifestyle locales in regional areas. And I'm not talking super country, but I'm saying, some coastal areas or lifestyle areas that are anchored to major cities, they're seeing a massive increase in inquiry, where people can work remotely or work digitally, or, even some areas like the Hunter and that, they can work 3 days a week from home, and 2 days a week they may have to travel to work. So they may catch a train on those days, but they don't mind traveling that distance. They can work on the train or in the car and make some calls or whatever. But the reality is that a certain number of cities now have become popular and appealing, and people can get better lifestyle qualities, better affordability, and those areas are seeing a great increase in interest, and people will say, I don't have to be anchored to CBD all my work in that way, and a lot of businesses will be pretty much open to having talent anywhere. Atlassian, one of the great Australian tech stories, have said everyone can work from home forever now. Like, it's up to you. So we're seeing that change. And so that is certainly a tectonic shift. Coming down to your point about the first home builder, of the home builder grant by the government, that was interesting. That was one of the estates we were promoting, which was in Googong in Canberra, when the Prime Minister stood on someone's lawn and made that announcement. What was interesting is we were getting some rebates from the developer, which was Mirvac. As soon as that grant went out, they had 70 blocks of land. Within a week, they dropped all their grants. The prices went up about $20,000 to $30,000, so more than the grant, and all the blocks were taken. And what I want to just put into context is the relative stimulus put towards this grant compared to the other forms of stimulus. So the JobKeeper program is $100 billion has been invested in that program. Whereas this grant that the government gave was only 722 million, so less than 1%. Yet the stimulus that's created has been significant. The government will make that back just on GST on all the builders building those houses. So if people say, well, that's just a short-term stimulus, that'll run out of 6 months. Again, no different to the JobKeeper program. If we see a drop-off in the construction industry, which was probably the largest employer in the country, for again, less than $1 billion, if the government wants to just extend that grant for another 700 million or for another 6 months, and it keeps stimulating the economy, it will do so. So I really believe that those areas that benefit for that, and that's what we've seen in a lot of the areas of new land estates in major urban centres, is only seeing price increase, not decrease. And probably the final thing, which I think is just the biggest win, and that is if your lens is a little bit bigger than the 3 months, 6 months, 12 months horizon you're looking at, or the 18 months where unemployment will peak and then drop down. Let me just remind those people who've been around probably 15 years. In 2008, so 12 years, 13 years, when we entered into the GFC, interest rates on home loans was 9%. Okay, so on a $500,000 loan, the interest bill is $45,000. Now, let me put that in perspective today. Most home loan rates are sitting about 2.3% on a P&I home loan. So if you have a $2 million loan, the interest bill is the same as a $500,000 loan, to put it in perspective. Now, I'm not suggesting you run out and get a $2 million loan, but it's just showing you it costs you, even on $1 million debt today, it is cheaper to hold that loan or that home than it is to hold a $500,000 loan 12 to 13 years ago. So going into that crisis before, our rates were high. Going into this crisis, again, incredible. Like if you've got your job, again, if unemployment now is 7.5%, it was 5%. It's not like there's 7.5% new unemployed. It's only 2.5% more unemployed. It may peak up to 10%. The reality still is that 90% of people have still got their jobs and they're working. And those people have seen a massive decrease in their interest rates and their ability to buy investment properties at lower rates. So they can actually take an incredible advantage. So if you look at this over a decade, the return, the value, if you've saved, $20,000 a year on your home loan and interest over 10 years, that's $200,000. If you do the same on your investment property, COVID and the stimulus that's been required by the Reserve Bank to drop rates has been is a massive opportunity. So if you can get past the short-term panic and issues and you've got stability, this is one of your greatest opportunities. So that will work into people making decisions over the next 12, 18 months. And I believe if we can manage our way as the world adjusts around this crisis, there will be massive stimulus and massive growth around certain asset classes, and property will certainly do well, residential in particular, from the interest rates.
That's great, Sam. And we've got a quick question just while we're on this point about some of those stimulus pieces here. We've had a question on if the home builder grant, is that available to property investors to build as well, or is it just purely back into those?
Just first home buyers, unfortunately. During the GFC, we did see some stimulus that came out from various state governments on zero stamp duty, and that applied to both investors and homeowners, which was just wonderful at the time. However, at this point, the government has politically said, we're only giving this to first home buyers. So unfortunately, we can't do that for investors. It is only for first home buyers. And in fact, I should highlight that. That is why, if you're a first home buyer, COVID again has been a massive blessing in disguise, because that $25,000 grant, along with various stamp duty exemptions and state first home buyer grants, is often about $50,000 gift. So you're being given, let's say you're buying a house for $500,000, you're being given 10% equity just because you're a first home buyer. That's a gift. That's an amazing opportunity. Couple that with interest rates at about, as I said, 2.3% on a fixed rate for 3 years. Now, let's say you've got a $500,000 home. You borrow $450,000. Your rate's about 2.3%. Your interest bill is about $10,000 or $11,000 a year, or about $200 a week. That's cheaper than renting the place at $450 a week or whatever it may be. So that's why, if you can get your stuff together and go buy a home and take advantage of these grants in this 6-month window, all these young people that might have been living at home or were renting are coming out in the market and stimulating the market, going, I want to buy a house, and this is the best opportunity. And that's why some of those regional areas are really seeing a massive uplift, or urban fringe areas, even in our major cities.
Yeah, that's great, Sam. It's really important to know. And that really leads us into talking about some of the new research our in-house team have developed over the last number of weeks. And I guess, as we say, Australia is not just one property market, it's many.
Yep, and that's probably one of the sayings you'll hear me say all the time and get sick of me saying. We believe there are many regions, or at least 8,800 suburbs in Australia, So when people say, what's the property market doing? I say, which one? Because there are so many different ones, and you need to get specific because no one buys all the property in Australia. So if we maybe have a look at some of these regions, we can talk to them. And so one of the areas that is seeing some significant growth and projected to grow by Residex is Shell Harbour, anchored to Wollongong. I've had some clients that have been clients for a couple of decades now, have moved down there. Coastal population, great affordability and medium price point, population growth. So one of the important things that is really important for house price appreciation is population growth. The other one is employment growth. So if we see infrastructure being invested, around those areas, and you'll see that here as a common theme, it needs to have job growth and population growth, which will create that stimulus. Even down at Shell Harbour, one of the big property development groups, Frasers out of Singapore, who did massive development in Sydney around that one Central Park, have done a beautiful marina, created a lifestyle. And we're seeing prices well in excess of $1.5 million there. It's bringing the area up and transforming those areas. So thanks, David. We'll hit the next one. Goulburn. For those that aren't aware, Goulburn is a regional and logistic hub anchored to the Australian Capital Territory, Canberra. It's on the proposed Canberra to Sydney fast rail corridor. It's actually not just Sydney to Canberra or Canberra to Sydney. If you Google CLARA, C-L-A-R-A, which is Consolidated Land and Rail Australia, it's a $200 billion project. There's a couple of ex-premiers on there. A lot of people, they've got a lot of land between here and Melbourne. And the idea is to create a super fast train like in Europe. One of the most, I think it's now the second, it used to be the first most, or busiest air corridor in the world was Sydney to Melbourne. Yeah. And so it's the second most busiest in the world now. So very, very lucrative travel corridor. But there's this group here thinking that if we can build a train line from Sydney to Melbourne, going through Canberra, we can build 7 cities along the way, do a value capture tax to help pay for the train line. And this is, over a couple of decades, but, and we're talking about trains that travel like European or the Japanese Shinkansen, the bullion train at, 400 to 500 kilometers an hour. You can be from Sydney CBD to Melbourne CBD in 2 hours, which is faster than catching a plane, because when you think about it, you've got to go to the airport. The airport's not in the CBD. You've got to park, you've got to wait for checks and safety and everything like that. So that process to get in is at least an hour, on the plane for an hour. And then from Melbourne Airport, this Melbourne's 3 hours is the time you're going to get. And from your house to the airport. So creating a train, and we're seeing this, it's happened in China, and a lot of their cities have got fast rail. Europe's got rail. Australia, because it hasn't had the population density, it hasn't had the business case for that, but that's changing now. And because we've got such concentration in our major cities, the key here is how do we interlink our major cities? And a fast rail project is becoming more feasible. Now, I know I've sort of diverted a bit on that. There's a lot more happening in Goulburn, and the median house price is great. They've got great rental yield, and there's a lot of logistics as well, because it's we have transport and things that connect through there. So we see that as a good, strong growth area over the next 5 years. Again, 7% per annum capital growth. So I think that figure there is incorrect. It's not 7% capital growth in 7 years. That wouldn't be exciting. So we didn't pick that up. So any of these slides you see on the picture there, that 7% is actually per annum compound growth, not just only 7%, because it wouldn't be flash at 7% over 5 years. So I missed that earlier in the proofreading. I'm sorry, David.
I'll take that one for the team, Sam, and on that there, but I think you're right. Just to clarify on those points that it is extrapolated over that period for those capital growth numbers. And we get the capital growth figures directly from Residex as well. So again, independent sources that come with that.
So it's 7% per annum growth. All right. Cool. So look at Logan, Queensland. If you think of Sydney, or the Greater Sydney plan is to have 3 major cities in Sydney. That's Sydney, Parramatta and Liverpool. Logan would be one of the major cities or principal activity centres in Brisbane. If you look at it, it's a $13 billion economy, 53,000 projected jobs, massive population growth from 2011 to 2036. Well, 2036 isn't that far anymore because we're already 2020. There's, again, one of the largest infrastructure pipelines of any region in Australia, $19 billion. That's massive. If you think of the Western Sydney Aerotropolis and all that, that's around about 20 billion. this is again one of the largest. So hospitals, schools, town centres, parks, industrial hubs and what have you, they're really making sure that this is a powerhouse growth area. And again, 10% per annum projected capital growth over the next 5 years in Logan in Brisbane. Thornby, New South Wales. So again, well, this Wollondilly Shire, all around Picton. If you'd been speaking to us about 5 or 6 years ago, we would have shown you areas around Macarthur, Campbelltown, which again, if people looked at the time, they thought, what, who wants to live out there? Some of the people in the more densified areas. If you think about Kellyville that we showed people 6, 7, 8 years ago, that has grown. And people now thinking, gee, I wish I got into those areas in the Northwest Corridor. Then they built an $8 billion metro. And we saw house prices in those areas go from 5, 6, 700,000 to well over $1 million. And even as far as Riverstone and Windsor. So if you missed out on that and you think, hey, I want to get the next area, well, it's the southwest of Sydney. This is the cheapest land you're going to get in Sydney at a cost per square metre, and the only way is up. Sydney is a basin. You hit state forests, Blue Mountains. There's nowhere to go. So land is coming into these areas, and it's still around the $300,000 mark for about a 450 square metre block. So it's under that magic $1,000 per square metre. So these areas, again, seem like the end of the earth, but no different to Parkley that used to be a big market and, big dust bowl and all that, but no longer open space. Then Rouse Hill was the next one that went. All those areas have been built out. This area here is like that. You drive out there and you look at it and you think, what's out here? However, it's the smart money is to be there before it gets momentum and it's fully. So people are out there looking at places like Oran Park now and what have you. But again, they have been built out. The values have gone. The rental yields are too compressed. This sits out a little bit further out of Macarthur, the Camden and Narellan area, but it's the entry point, and this is where you want to go. It's anchored to that Macarthur region. It will link to the Greater Western Sydney Aerotropolis, which will be $6 billion by the federal government on the airport, new train lines, new hospitals, universities, World Trade Centres, the neighbouring Wilton New Town, to benefit with the creation of the 5th largest retail commercial centre in New South Wales. So massive, massive infrastructure going in. And if you want to position yourself, when you look at buying properties for another, say, 10, 20, 30 years, this is an area that will have population and employment growth, and you won't recognise it and go, I remember when you could buy land for X. Thanks, David. Maitland. So this, again, is one of the regional areas really anchored to Newcastle. Newcastle is just phenomenal. If you look at the stats and the growth of Newcastle property market over the last 3 years, where Sydney was correcting, Newcastle just kept going up, and as has the Maitland area. It's a regional centre. It's the largest regional economy in New South Wales. Again, an additional 62,000 jobs. So again, going to that population growth as well as employment growth. $500 million on Maitland Hospital, redevelopment of the shopping centre there. So a number of different things happening there. So again, from infrastructure, lifestyle, it's got that Hunter region feel. There's produce, lifestyle, but still anchored to Newcastle, which is the 7th largest city in Australia. So we feel very strong in that area, and we have 3 property managers that live in that area, and the properties are often leased before they're completed. The demand is so strong, and the amount of people moving up there is crazy, and that has only intensified. Our group accountant, actually lives at the Central Coast. His office is at St Leonard's, and he's just one of those people who's bought a lovely house near the coast, and commutes to northern part of Sydney, and he can get a house that's a third of the cost that probably on about $1 million versus $3 million on the North Shore, and he gets to have the lifestyle that he wants in that regard. Thanks, Deb. Wollongong, so that amazing city, again, 8% per annum capital growth over the next 5 years. 3rd most expensive city, really because it's a satellite of Sydney. We've got a number of staff that have lived in Wollongong. Our office is in Cronulla, and people travel up from Wollongong. The population, again, significant, 300,000, will grow over the years. Great university, Port Kembla, lots of stuff happening down there. And, the redevelopment of West Dapto, new dwellings, new jobs and that. So a bit like Newcastle, these two satellite cities of Sydney, Newcastle a bit further, Wollongong much closer to Sydney. Those lifestyle, those beaches, you know, a lot of people are making that home. And that's why we're seeing the land availability there is tight. We struggle to see land registered and ready to go. Often it's about 6 to 12 months to some of the blocks we've got access to are still in 2022. Getting land supply there is very, very tight.
That's great, Sam. So there's 6 of the key areas that our research team have really been working hard on identifying there. And I think there's some really compelling pieces there. You're right. It's that certainly that those capital growth numbers are certainly very strong. And to remind you, they are per annum with that. I think the next piece, Sam, is to talk about, you know, the property type and some of the results we've had for some of our customers as recently as this year. So I'll jump into that now with our first one up at Everglass, a duplex property.
Yeah, so interesting that this was one of our clients' sons, young guy. He's 23 now. He was 22 originally when he got into this, and he's living at home, saving like crazy. Parents want to get him started out, said, go buy this. We got him into a duplex in Everglass, which is in that Hunter region. I'd never heard of Everglass actually till it came on our stock list from our research team. But again, it's not where I want to live or where I had to know about it. We just followed the research. So he bought this. It was 2 4-bedroom duplexes for $727,000. Just had on completion, the bank did a valuation. So this is a bank valuation, not a market appraisal, which is actually more. And bank valuers are often conservative for $880,000. So this young lad, I think his parents were a bit jealous. He manufactured $153,000 in equity. He's saved up some more money and he's going to be ready to go again at the age of 23. Now he'll still get great capital growth on that property. The rental yield, he got $900. It was leased within 3 days, both of the dwellings, the 2 4-bedroom dwellings. It's generating for this young guy $19,600 a year, positively geared. When his income, I think, is only about $55,000 or $60,000 for him relative to have got almost a 40% pay increase, and that's after tax dollars. This kid's grinning from ear to ear. He could eat a banana sideways.
That's great, Sam. And look, I'm excited now to share sort of the next property because this is actually my own. And, you know, Sam's worked very closely with my wife and I over the last 12 months in particular about getting our investment property. And I'm really excited to share this one today, Sam. So again, some great numbers on here and I am smiling from ear to ear.
Thanks, David. And look, you know, I think it's a testament. I didn't ask David. He said, look, I'd love to put mine up. I guess this is really important because ourselves, our staff, our families are patrons of our own product. And I think that's important to endorse that. Dave and his wife bought this through their superannuation. And you can see this is in Park Ridge in that Logan area that we talked about. It's a 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom dual key on one title. Price was $547,000, $630 a week combined rent. And again, you could see leased very, very quickly. The rental yield is 6.1%. The projected capital growth is great at 9%. And for the super fund, it's cash flow positive. So along with employee contributions for Dave from DPN and Dave's wife from her employer, along with this rent, will help them pay this property off very quickly. Not only so quickly, they can put that in offset and be ready to do another property in super if they want it sometime in the future. But it's great to have a success story just from our own staff. A number of our staff have bought properties over the year and made more in the capital growth and return than sometimes their pay has been over a 2 or 3 year period. So that's great. And we want our staff to win. And thanks, Dave, for allowing us to share your example here.
Yeah, no problem, Sam. It's a really exciting piece for it. And I think it's, again, back to the theme of what's happening at the moment around staying strong, having that courage and looking forward, that there are a lot possible at the moment. And sort of leads to the next piece here about maybe just sharing a little bit of information with the people on who have joined us tonight, a little bit about what we do as a business and what makes us different, Sam, and how we work with our customers.
Sure. And look, no different for David, who been working for us a while and doing marketing. And I said, look, I need to sit down with you and do a plan and a strategy. So there needs to be a conviction around your marketing for us. And so just for anybody that's on this call, what's really important, we just don't want to throw out numbers there, and you shouldn't be just trying to take something off the cuff or doing what someone else did. We always want to do a personalized strategy. That doesn't cost you anything. We'll do a full property investment plan for you. We'll show you where you're at, where you need to get to become financially independent, what resource you can use. You may be able to use your super, just like David did. You know, he couldn't get necessarily investment property outside of super to start with, but working on that. But he could utilize his superannuation. That was great to do that. And so everyone's situation is different. You don't need to feel under pressure to do anything. And we'll tell you honestly if you can do something or you can't do something. We're going to use research to make decisions. This is not marketing. You're going to see all the information in a homogenized format, meaning you compare apples to apples, all the different areas. We're not going to push one region or another. It's up to you to make the decision, but we'll give you the information. We never make a decision for our clients. And just like David and Nat, we're free not to do anything and never had to do anything. We give them the information. It's up to them to sit there, have a discussion, say, yeah, we'd like to proceed with this. We feel comfortable with that. Then what we do is we assist in establishing the right finance, the right structures. It's really important from a tax point of view, making sure you have the right structures where you should have maybe interest only on your investment loans, principal interest on your home loans, whatever it may be, whether it's be buying through a trust, a family trust, a unit trust, through superannuation, self-managed super. There's a number of different structures. We work with accountants, financial planners, brokers, whoever it may be. But it's really important we're a high-touch personal service, a concierge service, that we take it all the way through. So much so that we've even, in most instances, set up our own property management services across the Eastern Seaboard. So we found before we would do a lot of work in helping people do the research, do the finance, set up the structures, get the property, get it built, then hand it over to another property manager, and the service dropped off. What we've done is, and if you just look at the rave reviews we get from our property management team, and understand we provide rental guarantees. So we are very motivated to get those properties rented, or we start paying you rent if they're not rented within 6 weeks. So we put our money where our mouth is. And again, during this crisis, we were freaking out ourselves because we had a few hundred rental guarantees. So we were very motivated to make sure that we keep the rents solid and people in there at the right price. Otherwise, we've got to reach in our pocket. And that's where you can see that last point, ongoing property and portfolio. So we'll do the property management in most instances, or we'll partner with reputable agencies in other instances, and we'll continue to review the portfolio. So when the time is right, we look at maybe getting your next second property, third property, fourth property. So as you can see from the poll at the beginning of this call, there are a number of people that already have an investment property, but what you'll find is that there's anytime I've done a plan for people, there's never been really an instance where everyone can achieve their goals just off one investment property. They at least need two, if not more. So I'd recommend for you, if you haven't done it or you've already got a property, you may want to review your current portfolio. Sometimes it's good to keep some properties. You may need to divest and look at other ones. That's entirely up to you. But our approach is to make sure we provide a personalized approach, step it out, work at your pace, and help you, again, our purpose for existence to help you live the life you want. And that's both now and the future. So thank you for that opportunity. If you're interested, I think we've got a hello@dpn.com.au. If you want to learn more about the locations, the opportunities, and talk to one of our team, we'd welcome that opportunity. So thanks for listening in. I'll hand back to you, David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam. And it's good to get that overview of how we go about working with our investor clients. And as Sam said, we do have a range of great properties available now. We've been incredibly busy, which has been very fortunate at this time, but we have had a very high level of inquiries. We do have a range of good options at the moment. And you can reach our team. It's very simple, hello@dpn.com.au. I can see we've got a couple of questions just coming through here. So before we do sign off, I'm just going to grab those questions and trouble Sam to go through those. I'm just opening those up now. Bear with me on the technology. Just opening, bear with me for one moment. Okay, so that's not, in all the wonders of webinars and technology, for some reason, I'm unable to open that question at this present.
Oh, it's a compliment. Thanks, guys. Great content.
That's right. Well, there you go. That makes my job so much easier. Look, I just want to sign off and say thank you very much, everyone, for joining in tonight. And I can see that everyone actually stayed on this webinar. I appreciate people's probably had 2 or 3 of these today. We're very much getting square eyes at the moment from lots of Zoom calls as we are, but we wish you all the best in the future. Our team are available. Again, that email address is hello@dpn.com.au, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And thanks again, Sam.
Thanks, David. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a good evening. Cheers.
Bye.